The sun hung low over the Montana wilderness, casting long golden streaks through the towering pines. A crisp autumn wind rustled the leaves, whispering secrets through the forest. Daisy, a golden retriever with a coat the color of honey, bounded through the underbrush, her nose twitching as she caught the familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth. She lived for moments like these, exploring the woods near her owner Jake's remote cabin, chasing the fleeting scent of rabbits, and feeling the cool breeze ruffle her fur. But today was different. Today, something felt off. Daisy paused mid-stride, her ears perking up. A sound, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the trees. A cry. Not the sharp yelp of a coyote or the hoot of an owl. No, this was different. It was small. Frightened. She turned her head, pinpointing the noise. It came from somewhere deeper in the forest, beyond the well-worn path she and Jake usually walked. Without hesitation, she followed, her paws crunching softly against the fallen leaves. The crying grew louder, urgent now. Daisy's heart pounded. She weaved through the dense thicket, slipping past the gnarled roots and fallen logs until finally, she reached a small clearing. And there, nestled beneath a rotting log, were two tiny creatures. Daisy froze, her head tilting in curiosity. At first glance, they looked like puppies, small, round bodies covered in thick, dark fur. But as one of them lifted its trembling head, Daisy saw the unmistakable round ears, the wide, glassy eyes. These weren't puppies. They were bear cubs. Alone. Cold. Helpless. Daisy took a cautious step forward, her keen nose picking up the scent of fear. The cubs were too young to be alone. Their mother should be nearby. And yet there was no sign of her. No deep growl from the shadows. No protective presence lurking in the trees. One of the cubs let out a tiny whimper, struggling feebly to move. The other barely stirred, its breathing shallow. They were weak, too weak to last much longer in the harsh wilderness. Daisy whimpered in return, her motherly instincts kicking in. She inched closer, her warm breath washing over their tiny forms. Gently, she nudged the smallest cub with her nose, willing it to respond. The little one let out a soft sigh, curling against her warmth. A rustling behind her made Daisy spin around. Jake was approaching, his boots crunching against the forest floor. "Daisy!" His voice was soft but laced with concern. "What is it, girl?" Then he saw them. For a long moment, Jake didn't move. His sharp, experienced eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of the mother bear. But the woods were silent, save for the whisper of the wind and the tiny, desperate breaths of the cubs. "Damn," Jake muttered under his breath. He knelt beside Daisy, carefully examining the tiny creatures. "They're starving," he murmured. "And freezing." Daisy gave a low, pleading whine, nudging the cubs closer to her warmth. Jake sighed, rubbing a hand over his beard. He knew what Daisy was asking. He also knew the risk. Taking in orphaned bear cubs wasn't just a challenge, it was dangerous. If their mother was out there somewhere, she would be searching for them. And if she found them at the cabin, it wouldn't end well. But Ake had spent his life rescuing animals. He couldn't just walk away. He looked at Daisy, who was now curled protectively around the cubs, licking their tiny heads as if they were her own. A deep breath. A decision. "All right, girl," Jake said, standing up. "Let's get them home." Daisy's tail wagged once, slow and steady. She carefully lifted one of the cubs by the scruff of its neck, just as a mother dog would do to her puppies. Jake scooped up the other, cradling it in his flannel-covered arms. Together, they turned toward the cabin, stepping back onto the path as the forest watched in silence. Behind them, the clearing stood empty once more. The wind shifted. A lone howl echoed through the mountains. And somewhere, deep in the wilderness, a mother bear searched for the cubs she had lost. The cabin was warm, the scent of burning wood and pine filling the air as Jake stoked the fire. Daisy lay on the thick rug near the hearth, her golden fur glowing in the firelight. But she wasn't alone. Nestled against her belly were the two tiny bear cubs, their little bodies still trembling from the cold. Daisy licked them gently, her warm tongue running over their fur in slow, soothing strokes. They barely moved at first, exhausted from hunger and fear, but little by little, their shivers began to fade. Jake watched from his rocking chair, a deep crease forming between his brows. "I don't know what we just got ourselves into, girl," he muttered, taking a slow sip of coffee. He had spent years working in wildlife rescue, but this was different. Raising orphaned bear cubs was no easy task. They needed milk, warmth, protection, things Daisy could provide for now, but not forever. Still, as he watched his loyal retriever curl protectively around them, a soft sigh escaping her, Jake knew there was no stopping her. Daisy had made up her mind. Jake stood and moved to the kitchen, rummaging through his cabinets. He wasn't sure how long the cubs had been without their mother, but judging by their weak cries and thin bodies, they needed food, and fast. He grabbed an old bottle from the back of the cupboard, one he had used years ago when he'd briefly fostered an orphan fawn. Filling it with warm goat's milk, he kneeled beside Daisy and gently lifted one of the cubs. The little one let out a weak protest but didn't resist as Jake brought the bottle to its lips. Slowly, instinct kicked in, and it began to suckle. "There you go," Jake murmured. "That's it." Daisy watched with rapt attention, her ears twitching with every soft sound the cub made. When the first cub had its fill, Jake carefully switched to the other, repeating the process. By the time he was done, both cubs were drowsy, their bellies full for the first time in what was likely days. Daisy let out a quiet sigh of contentment as the cubs snuggled deeper into her fur. She wrapped a paw around them, her tail wagging faintly. Jake shook his head in disbelief. He had always known Daisy was special. Her gentle nature had made her a favorite among all the animals he had cared for over the years. But this was something else entirely. "You really think you're their mama, huh?" he mused, scratching behind her ears. Daisy let out a soft huff as if to say, "Of course I am." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. The forest was alive with the sounds of the wild, branches creaking, leaves rustling, the distant call of an owl. Somewhere out there, a mother bear was searching. Jake exhaled, glancing at the door. He had done enough rescues to know the risks. If that bear was still alive, still searching for her cubs, she wouldn't stop. And if she caught their scent here? Jake ran a hand through his graying hair. "We can't keep them forever, Daisy," he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Daisy didn't respond. She was too busy keeping her new family warm. Jake sighed. Tomorrow he'd make some calls. See if a wildlife center could take them in. But for now, just for tonight, he wouldn't take them away from her. As the fire crackled and the cabin filled with the soft sounds of sleeping cubs, Daisy let her eyes drift shut. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. And outside, beyond the safety of the cabin walls, a pair of glowing eyes watched from the tree-line. A mother had come looking for what she had lost. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the window panes of the cabin. Outside, the first dusting of winter snow had settled over the earth, muffling the usual forest sounds. But something, someone, moved in the darkness beyond the trees. Inside, Daisy lay curled around the cubs, their tiny bodies rising and falling in steady, rhythmic breaths. They had grown stronger over the past few days, their cries less desperate, their movements more assured. They no longer trembled with hunger but instead clung to Daisy as if she were the only home they had ever known. Jake, however, wasn't at ease. From his chair near the fire, he glanced toward the window for what must have been the 100th time that evening. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. It wasn't paranoia. He had seen the tracks earlier that morning. Huge prints in the fresh mud near the tree line. Heavy. The bears. She was out there. And she was close. Jake let out a slow breath, glancing over at Daisy. "We might have a problem, girl," he murmured, but Daisy didn't lift her head. She was too focused on nuzzling the cubs, cleaning their fur with slow, loving licks. He couldn't blame her. She had adopted them fully now, her motherly instinct stronger than ever. But the truth remained. If their real mother was out there, searching, they couldn't keep them much longer. A sharp crack outside made Jake tense. He placed his mug down and grabbed the rifle that rested near the door. Not to use, he would never shoot unless he had no choice, but to be prepared. Carefully, he moved to the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. His breath caught. Just beyond the tree line, half shrouded in darkness, stood a massive silhouette. A bear. The mother. Her black eyes gleamed in the moonlight as she sniffed the air, her massive form barely shifting as the wind tossed flakes of snow around her. She wasn't moving closer, wasn't charging, but she was there, watching. Waiting. Jake's grip on the rifle tightened. He knew she wasn't just wandering by. She had followed the scent of her cubs here. He turned back to Daisy. She still hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had, and she simply didn't care. To her, she was their mother now. Jake exhaled. This couldn't go on much longer. If the bear didn't find her cubs soon, desperation would set in. And desperation made wild animals dangerous. Another gust of wind blew through the trees, and with it, the great bear let out a low, mournful huff. Not aggressive, not threatening, just lost. Jake's chest tightened. He had spent a lifetime around animals, and he knew what that sound meant. She wasn't hunting. She wasn't angry. She was grieving. Jake sighed and lowered his rifle. He turned to Daisy, who finally lifted her head, sensing his shift in mood. "We can't keep them forever, girl," he said softly. Daisy's ears perked, but she didn't move. She only curled tighter around the cubs, her golden fur a barrier between them and the world outside. Jake rubbed his temple. Tomorrow he would make a choice. He would do what was right. But tonight, he let Daisy keep them safe. Outside, in the swirling snow, the mother bear watched a moment longer before slowly turning away. But she would be back. She wouldn't leave without them. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick clouds, casting a pale gray light over the snow-covered forest. Jake stood on the porch, steaming coffee in one hand, rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. She was still out there. The mother bear had been circling the cabin all night. He hadn't seen her again, but he had heard her, low huffs carried on the wind, the occasional crack of a branch under her massive weight. She was waiting. Behind him, the door creaked open, and Daisy stepped out, her golden fur ruffled from sleep. She stretched lazily before trotting over to Jake, pressing her warm body against his leg. He looked down at her, sighing. "You know what we have to do, don't you?" Daisy's ears perked, but she didn't respond. She just gazed up at him with those deep, understanding eyes, the same eyes that had convinced him, time and time again, that she saw the world differently than most dogs. Jake knelt beside her, scratching behind her ears. "It's not fair to her, Daisy," he murmured. "She's their mother. She didn't abandon them, something happened. And now she's out there, waiting, just like you would be if someone took your pups." Daisy's tail gave the smallest flick, but her expression remained unreadable. Inside the cabin, the cubs stirred. Their tiny bodies wobbled as they stretched, letting out small, yawning squeaks before shuffling toward the warm spot where Daisy had been lying. When they didn't find her, they let out soft, confused cries. Daisy's ears twitched, and for a moment, Jake saw the battle happening inside her. Instinct versus love. She whined softly, turning back toward the door. But Jake gently held her back, placing a firm hand on her chest. "Not this time, girl." Daisy's head lowered. Jake sighed, standing up. He had made up his mind. Today was the day. He would reunite them with their real mother. He went back inside, grabbing a thick wool blanket and wrapping it around the cubs. They wriggled at first but quickly settled as he scooped them into his arms. Daisy watched his every move, her body tense. "This is what's right," he told her softly. She didn't argue, but she didn't wag her tail either. The walk to the tree line was slow, deliberate. Jake kept his steps light, scanning for movement in the shadows. The snow crunched beneath his boots, each step an unspoken promise to the creature waiting in the woods. Daisy followed close behind, her tail low, ears pinned back. Then, just as they reached the clearing, Jake stopped. He didn't have to wait long. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air. Not a growl, something softer. A call. And then, from behind a massive pine tree, she emerged. The mother bear. She was huge, even bigger up close. Her dark fur was thick, dusted with snowflakes. Her black eyes, usually fierce and wild, were locked onto one thing only, the bundle in Jake's arms. The cubs stirred, their tiny noses sniffing the air. Then, as if something inside them finally clicked, they let out a high-pitched squeak. The bear froze. Another squeak. And then, before Jake could even think, the cubs wriggled free of the blanket, tumbling into the snow. For the first time, Daisy let out a small whimper, taking a step forward as if to gather them back. But Jake gently rested a hand on her back. "Let them go," he whispered. The mother bear lowered herself onto all fours, watching intently as the cubs stumbled toward her. Their movements were clumsy, but they knew exactly where they were going. And then, the moment they reached her, she made a sound Jake had never heard before. A deep, rumbling huff, not a warning, not a threat, but something softer. Something warm. The cubs pressed against her thick fur, nuzzling her, tiny paws gripping at her sides. Daisy watched, her golden fur bristling, her body tensed like she wanted to run forward and pull them back. But she didn't. Instead, she took a slow step backward, her ears twitching as the mother bear let out another soft huff, this time directed at her. Not a warning. Not a threat. A thank you. Daisy blinked. And just like that, the bear turned, her cubs wobbling along beside her. Jake watched as she disappeared into the trees, her dark form blending into the forest until there was nothing left but the falling snow. For a long moment, neither he nor Daisy moved. Then, finally, Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced down at Daisy, expecting sadness, but instead he saw something else. She had done what a mother does. She had loved them, nurtured them. And then, when the time came, she had let them go. Jake knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You did good, girl," he murmured. Daisy let out a small sigh, pressing her head into his chest. And as the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks left behind, they stood together, watching, waiting, and listening to the sounds of the wilderness once more. The cabin felt different that evening. Quieter. Still. 4 days, the tiny bear cubs had filled the space with their soft whimpers and clumsy movements. Now, their absence settled over the room like a thick winter fog. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the last traces of the cubs' tiny footprints. Daisy lay curled in her usual spot by the fire, but she wasn't sleeping. Her golden fur rose and fell with slow, heavy breaths, her ears flicking at every creak and groan of the old cabin. Every so often, she would lift her head, glancing toward the door, as if expecting to hear the tiny, familiar squeaks of the cubs. But each time, there was only silence. Jake watched her from his chair, a deep ache settling in his chest. She had done the right thing. They had done the right thing. He had no doubt that the mother bear would care for them now, that they would grow strong under her protection. But none of that changed the fact that Daisy had lost something she had come to love. And love, no matter how right the goodbye, always left an ache. Jake stood, setting his empty coffee mug on the wooden table. He walked over to the fireplace and crouched beside Daisy, running a hand gently over her back. "I know, girl," he murmured. "I miss him too." Daisy let out a soft sigh, pressing her head into his palm. For a while, they sat in silence, the fire warming them both. Then, without a sound, Daisy got up and padded toward the door. She sat down, staring at it, her tail resting still against the floor. Jake knew what she wanted. With a sigh, he grabbed his coat and opened the door, stepping out onto the porch. The cold bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His eyes were already scanning the trees, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hush of the snowfall, the whisper of the wind through the branches. The forest had moved on. Daisy took a step forward, her paws sinking into the soft snow. She sniffed the air, her ears twitching, her eyes scanning the same darkness Jake had searched. She didn't whine, didn't bark. She just stood there, listening. And then, after a long moment, she took a deep breath and turned back toward the cabin. Jake held the door open for her, and she stepped inside without hesitation. No lingering glances, no second thoughts. She had made peace with what was gone. She had been their mother when they needed one. Now she would be Daisy again. Jake smiled softly as she curled up beside the fire, her body stretching out a little more comfortably than before. He ran a hand over her head. Good girl. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing the earth in silence. Somewhere, deep in the forest, a mother bear rested with her cubs tucked safely at her side. And in a small, warm cabin, a golden retriever finally closed her eyes, letting sleep take her into dreams of soft paws, tiny squeaks, and the love only a mother could give. Days passed, then weeks. The snow piled high against the cabin, winter settling deep into the forest. Life went on as it always had, quiet, steady, unshaken by the cold. But something in Daisy had changed. She still wagged her tail when Jake tossed her a treat. Still bounded through the snow on their morning walks. Still curled up by the fire at night, her golden fur glowing in the firelight. But every so often, when the wind carried a certain scent or the trees whispered a little differently, she would pause, ears perking, nose twitching. Jake noticed. And he understood. She wasn't waiting. Not exactly. But some part of her still reached out, still wondered. Then one early morning it happened. Jake was chopping wood behind the cabin when Daisy suddenly froze. She lifted her head, nostrils flaring, body going rigid. A second later, she took off, bounding through the snow, past the tree line, deeper into the forest. Daisy! Jake called, dropping the axe. He hurried after her, his boots crunching through the frost. She moved fast, weaving between trees, her body low, tail high. She wasn't afraid. She knew where she was going. And then, Jake saw it. A massive, dark shape stood just beyond the clearing. The mother bear. Jake's breath caught, every instinct telling him to stop, to turn back. But Daisy? Daisy didn't hesitate. She slowed, her steps careful but sure, her golden fur stark against the white snow. She stopped just a few feet away from the bear, her head tilting slightly. And then, two smaller shapes peeked out from behind their mother's thick legs. The cubs. They had grown. Their fur was fuller, their steps more confident, but their eyes, those eyes, held something familiar. Recognition. Daisy took a slow step forward, her tail wagging just once. The mother bear let out a low, soft huff, not a warning, not a threat. A greeting. The cubs chirped, their small bodies shifting eagerly, but they stayed by their mother's side. And for a long, silent moment, there they stood, dog and bear, once family, now something different. Not quite strangers. Not quite the same. But still connected. Jake watched from a distance, heart pounding. He knew this was something rare, something beyond logic or instinct. It was something deeper. The bond. And then, as quietly as they had come, the bears turned, disappearing into the trees once more. Daisy watched them go, her ears twitching at the sound of their retreating footsteps. But she didn't chase after them. She didn't whine or try to follow. She simply sat, her golden fur dusted with snow, watching. And when the forest fell silent again, she turned back toward Jake, her tail wagging gently, and trotted back to his side. Jake knelt, scratching behind her ears. They're doing good, huh, girl? Daisy licked his hand once before pressing her head against his chest. She understood. She had loved them, raised them, let them go. And now they had come back, if only for a moment, to say goodbye. Jake let out a slow breath, running a hand through Daisy's fur. Come on, girl. Let's go home. And together, side by side, they walked back to the cabin, leaving nothing but their footprints in the fresh snow. A chapter had closed. But the story, their story, would never truly end.